With the Hoenn tour coming up this weekend, it's a good idea to prepare and plan on which spawns you'll focus on. This guide should help you out with which Pokemon originally discovered in the Hoenn region will be your best raid partners. I also may make a video in the future about Hoenn's legendary Pokemon. However, since Hoenn tour is so soon, that probably won't happen, honestly. I'm going to mention these terms a lot in this video, so if you're a newer player you might not know what they mean. DPS stands for damage per second, and it means how quickly a Pokemon can deal damage. And ER means equivalent rating, and it's an overall metric of a Pokemon's performance in raids, taking DPS and another metric that I won't really talk about called TDO into account. Sceptile is the first Pokemon you'll probably want to get. The Hoenn region starters are all above average compared to other starters. Sceptile deals 15.43 DPS and has an equivalent rating of 34.12. That performance is very similar to other familiar Pokemon like Torterra, Venusaur, and Celebi. However, recent additions to the game, such as Kartana and Zarude, are far better. Even Chestnut is considerably better than Sceptile. However, you should still try to get one good Sceptile, since its strength comes in its Mega Evolution, which has a higher DPS and ER than every other grass attacker, Megas and Shadows included. The fire starter, Blaziken, is in a similar position, but with one advantage, which is that even in its non-shadow form, it has better performance than every other Blast Burn user. Unfortunately, Blaziken lacks bulk, but it is still around the same level as using a Chandelure or a Heatran. In its Mega form, Blaziken does more DPS but has less bulk than Mega Charizard Y. The former has an ER of 51.91, while the latter has 51.65. That's a fairly negligible difference, but it still means that Mega Blaziken isn't completely dominant over the Fire-type PvE meta. Swampert is known for being one of the best Pokemon in the Go Battle League, but how does it do in PvE? For the most part, it deserves its reputation in raids as well. Like Blaziken, Swampert beats all other Hydro Cannon users. However, this will only last until Greninja inevitably gets access to the move. Swampert in its normal form performs better than Kingler and worse than Shadow Gyarados. However, unlike the other two starters, Swampert also has a Shadow form. Unfortunately, it's currently unavailable, but Shadow Swampert's ER beats that of Shadow Feraligatr and Surf Kyogre. In terms of DPS, it's only beaten by Primal Kyogre and its own Mega Evolution. Speaking of the Mega Evolutions, Mega Swampert is currently the best water type, except for Primal Kyogre, which is kind of released right now, but it will be fully released this weekend. However, Swampert in all three of its forms is still worth going after, even though it'll be outclassed this weekend, so at least try to gather some more XL candy for it. Gardevoir is probably the most talked about fairy type in Pokemon Go, however it gets a lot more attention than it probably deserves. Gardevoir's normal form has a DPS of 14.90 and an ER of 33.91. This is around the same level as Togekiss and considerably higher than Granbull. Initially, Gardevoir looks really good, DPS higher than every other non-Shadow and non-Mega, and ER just one spot lower. However, this all changes when you compare Gardevoir and its Mega and Shadow forms to Dragon, Ice, and Fighting type attackers. This is because the main utility of fairies is as anti-dark and anti-dragon counters, but unfortunately, they just don't do a very good job at it. Mega Gardevoir performs surprisingly well, with an ER around that of Shadow Dragonite and future Mega Heracross. However, even Shadow Gardevoir only performs equally to Mega Lopunny, Latios, and Conkeldurr, all of which are okay at best. Gardevoir is another one of those Pokemon that you should try to get for the Mega, but not much else. Manectric. This is a short one. Manectric is great as a Mega Evolution, but terrible otherwise. Mega Manectric's ER is 43.28, suggesting similar performance to Fusion Bolt, Zekrom, and Shadow Electivire. This is much better than Mega Ampharos's mediocre performance of 16.5 DPS and an ER of 39.72, so it's the clear winner in terms of Mega Evolutions. Banette in its normal form is pretty bad, but its Shadow and Mega forms both have something to offer. Shadow Banette's DPS is even higher than that of Gengar, 18.84. However, Banette suffers from being too frail, and being a Shadow Pokemon doesn't help. Unfortunately, that bulk is so bad that its ER is even worse than Giratina Altered, which is the form with legs. Luckily, Mega Banette gains bulk and DPS, taking the number 2 spot overall. However, Mega Gengar is still miles ahead, so if you already have one, don't bother. Mega and Shadow Banette are still great to go after for newer players who need a cheap and easily accessible option. Oh wait, I was on Absol the whole time. There's Banat. Okay, back to Absol. Similar situation of Banat here. Shadow and Mega Absol both have use, but only as a budget attacker, and it's hard to consider Shadow Absol budget since that hasn't been around for so long, so that's out of the picture. But what about the Mega Evolution? It does pretty well, with a DPS of 18.72 and an ER of 38.5. It's around Darkrai and Shadow Honchkrow. However, with Brutal Swing Hydreigon being as accessible as it is, most players have no need for it. As a Mega Evolution, it still places lower than both Houndoom and Gyarados in ER, however it does slightly outpace them in DPS. So if you're looking for a high DPS but frail, aka Glass Cannon Mega Evolution, Absol is the way to go. In general, the two best Ice-type attackers are Shadow Weavile and Shadow Mamoswine. They both have very high DPS and at least at one point were fairly accessible, but for Mega Ice attackers to boost those two, there are only two, Glalie and Abomasnow, and honestly, they're both pretty bad. Mega Glalie has 16.19 DPS and 36.56 ER. That's more DPS than Mega Abomasnow, but less bulk. Overall, barely coming out on top. However, these stats don't even hold up when compared to non-Shadow Mamoswine, which is better overall. Mega Glalie is only worth going after if you really, really need a Mega. Other than that, you're better sticking to better Pokemon. Salamence with Dragon Tail and Outrage is basically a cheap Rayquaza. It has a massive attack stat of 275 and access to the top tiered moves Dragon Tail and Outrage, although Outrage is Legacy, which gives it 18.27 DPS and 42.52 ER in its base form. That places it right between Garchomp and Palkia, although it's less bulky than those two. However, Salamence gets more interesting in its Shadow and Mega forms. Shadow Salamence deals an insane 22.16 DPS, making it the highest DPS dragon type and the 6th highest currently in the game, and an incredible ER of 49.28. Mega Salamence doesn't have quite as much DPS at 19.87, but the added bulk gives it a higher ER than Shadow Salamence at 50.79. Salamence is currently one of the best Pokemon of the game, especially with its recent availability. Finally, Metagross. In the world of Metagross, I don't know how the correct way to say it is. Maybe I'll switch between them. In the world of steel types, you probably hear Metagross being talked about a lot. That's because in any practical scenario, it's the only steel type you should be using. In its non-Mega, non-Shadow form, Metagross still beats the likes of Mega Aggron, Dialga, and Mega Scizor. In fact, the only things ahead of it are its own stronger forms. Base form Metagross deals 17.98 DPS and has an ER of 43.61, which is 12% higher than the next best option. Shadow and Mega Metagross are even better. Its Shadow Form CPS is boosted to 21.76 and its ER to 50.42. Mega Metagross is even better, albeit with a slightly lower DPS. It deals 20.51 DPS but gains bulk, giving it 52.59 ER. The only thing that even can be compared to Metagross is Zacian's Crown Sword form, which will eventually be released. With the moves Metal Claw and Iron Head, it will have a better performance than base form Metagross, but both the Shadow and the Mega will perform significantly better than that. Metagross is overall one of the best Pokemon you can have if you're interested in future-proof raid attackers. So out of those, the best are probably Sceptile, Blaziken, Swampert, and then Salamence and Metagross. The middle ones are good if you need Megas, and outside of these, what was it, 11 Pokemon, there's really no good raiders. Like, a lot of people talk about other ones, but these are all you're gonna really need to go after. If you actually watch this, you should subscribe to me, because I like Pokemon Go, and I know a lot about it, and so I would like to tell people about Pokemon Go. And if more people subscribe to me, then I can tell more people about Pokemon Go. Okay, I think that's it. So comment if you want the legendary Pokemon version of this video, because I could still do that.